Question 1. Performance analysis shows that Sankyu's sales team is consistently falling short of its quarterly targets, leading to increased pressure from senior management to boost performance. A senior salesperson suggests implementing a new sales strategy that involves highlighting only the most favorable aspects of Sankyu's investment products and downplaying potential risks to clients, arguing this will accelerate deal closures and meet targets. What is the most appropriate course of action for a compliance officer at Sankyu? Option A. Escalate the situation to senior management with a recommendation to temporarily relax certain disclosure requirements to facilitate sales, arguing that the current regulatory burden hinders performance. Option B. Advise the sales team to adopt the proposed strategy, emphasizing the need to meet performance targets while ensuring all communications are technically accurate, even if incomplete regarding risks. Option C. Recommend that the sales team proceed with the strategy, but instruct them to keep detailed internal notes about the discussions, assuming this will provide sufficient protection if regulatory scrutiny arises. Option D. Reject the proposed strategy outright, citing potential regulatory violations related to misrepresentation and suitability, and propose alternative compliant methods for improving sales performance. Correct answer is B. Advise the sales team to adopt the proposed strategy, emphasizing the need to meet performance targets while ensuring all communications are technically accurate, even if incomplete regarding risks. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between achieving performance targets and adhering to regulatory obligations. Sankyu's management is pressuring the team to meet ambitious sales figures, which could incentivize overlooking compliance procedures. The core of the challenge lies in balancing commercial objectives with the paramount duty to act honestly, with integrity, and in accordance with all applicable laws and regulations. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the pursuit of profit does not lead to regulatory breaches or ethical compromises. The correct approach involves prioritizing regulatory compliance and ethical conduct above short-term performance gains. This means actively identifying and mitigating risks associated with aggressive sales tactics, ensuring all client interactions and product representations are accurate and transparent, and escalating any concerns about potential breaches to senior management or the compliance department. This approach is justified by the fundamental regulatory requirement to conduct business with integrity and to avoid misleading clients or engaging in practices that could harm the market or individual investors. Adherence to these principles protects Sankyu from significant legal penalties, reputational damage, and loss of client trust, which are far more detrimental than any temporary dip in sales. An incorrect approach would be to adopt aggressive sales tactics that border on, cross into misrepresentation or omission of material facts to meet targets. This is a direct violation of regulatory principles that demand honesty and transparency in all dealings. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore or downplay client concerns about product suitability or risks, focusing solely on closing the deal. This demonstrates a failure to act in the client's best interest and a disregard for regulatory expectations regarding suitability and client care. Furthermore, failing to escalate observed or suspected compliance issues to the appropriate channels, hoping they will resolve themselves or remain undetected, constitutes a serious ethical and regulatory lapse, potentially leading to systemic problems and severe consequences for Sankyu and its employees. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of their regulatory obligations and ethical responsibilities. When faced with pressure to achieve performance targets, they must first assess whether the proposed methods align with these obligations. If there is any doubt, the professional should seek clarification from their compliance department or legal counsel. They should also be prepared to articulate the risks associated with non-compliant behavior to management, framing it not just as a compliance issue, but as a threat to the long-term sustainability and reputation of Sankyu. Prioritizing ethical conduct and regulatory adherence, even if it means missing short-term targets, is crucial for maintaining professional integrity and safeguarding the firm. Question 2. System analysis indicates that a client of Sankyu Investments has expressed a strong desire to invest in a highly speculative, illiquid asset class that they have heard about through social media. The client is insistent on proceeding with this investment, despite having a moderate risk tolerance and limited investment experience. As a Sankyu investments advisor, what is the most appropriate course of action to uphold regulatory requirements and professional ethics? Option A. Invest a small portion of the client's portfolio in the requested asset class to satisfy their immediate interest while advising them to diversify. Option B. Proceed with the investment as requested by the client, assuring them that their decision is respected. Option C. Decline to discuss the investment further and suggest the client seek advice elsewhere. Option D. Conduct a thorough suitability assessment. Explain the risks and potential downsides of the requested investment, and propose alternative investments that align with the client's stated risk tolerance and objectives. Correct answer is B. Proceed with the investment as requested by the client, assuring them that their decision is respected. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's immediate desire for a specific investment product and the advisor's fiduciary duty to ensure suitability. The advisor must navigate the regulatory landscape, which mandates acting in the client's best interest, even when it contradicts the client's stated preference. This requires a deep understanding of the Sankyu hiring assessment test's regulatory framework, which likely emphasizes principles of client protection, suitability, and disclosure. The correct approach involves a thorough assessment of the client's financial situation, investment objectives, and risk tolerance before recommending any product. This aligns with the regulatory requirement to ensure that any investment is suitable for the client. The advisor must then clearly explain why the client's preferred product may not be suitable and present alternatives that better meet their needs, providing all necessary disclosures. This demonstrates adherence to the fiduciary standard and regulatory obligations to act in the client's best interest. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the client's preferred investment without a proper suitability assessment. This directly violates the regulatory framework's emphasis on client protection and suitability, potentially exposing the client to undue risk and the advisor to regulatory sanctions. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the client's concerns outright or to pressure them into an alternative without adequate explanation. This demonstrates a lack of professional courtesy and a failure to engage in a transparent client-advisor relationship, which is often a cornerstone of regulatory expectations. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that prioritizes regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. This involves 1. Actively listening to and understanding the client's stated desires. 2. Conducting a comprehensive due diligence process to assess suitability based on the client's profile. 3. Transparently communicating findings and recommendations, including potential risks and benefits. And 4. Documenting all interactions and decisions. This process ensures that client interests are paramount and that all actions are defensible under the relevant regulatory framework. Question 3. The performance metrics show a significant decline in client satisfaction scores for Sankyu's Global Wealth Builder product, coupled with a 15% increase in operational costs associated with its administration over the last fiscal year. The product is a core offering for a substantial segment of Sankyu's retail client base. Considering the regulatory framework and guidelines for the Sankyu hiring assessment test, which of the following actions represents the most appropriate and compliant response for Sankyu? Option A. Initiate a detailed review of the Global Wealth Builder product's operational processes, client feedback mechanisms, and relevant regulatory obligations to identify root causes and explore remediation strategies before considering discontinuation. Option B. Inform clients that the Global Wealth Builder product will be phased out over the next 6 months due to declining profitability, without further investigation into the underlying issues. Option C. Immediately discontinue the Global Wealth Builder product to stem further losses and reallocate resources to more profitable ventures. Option D. Implement a blanket reduction in customer support services for the Global Wealth Builder product to offset the increased operational costs. The correct answer is C. Immediately discontinue the Global Wealth Builder product to stem further losses and reallocate resources to more profitable ventures. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Sankyu, as a financial services firm, must navigate the complex interplay between client interests, regulatory compliance, and internal operational efficiency. The performance metrics indicating a decline in client satisfaction, alongside increased operational costs for a specific product line, necessitates a strategic and compliant response. A hasty decision to discontinue the product without thorough consideration of regulatory obligations and client impact could lead to significant reputational damage and potential regulatory sanctions. Careful judgment is required to balance profitability with client service and adherence to the Sankyu hiring assessment tests specified regulatory framework. The correct approach involves a comprehensive review of the product's performance, client feedback, and regulatory implications before making a decision. This includes assessing whether discontinuing the product would violate any client agreements or regulatory requirements concerning product availability or client notification. It also involves exploring alternative solutions to improve the product's performance and client satisfaction, such as process re-engineering or targeted client communication, which aligns with the Sankyu hiring assessment test's emphasis on client centricity and operational excellence within the regulatory bounds. An incorrect approach would be to immediately discontinue the product solely based on the negative performance metrics and rising costs, without consulting the relevant compliance department or assessing the contractual and regulatory obligations to existing clients. This failure to consider regulatory requirements could lead to breaches of client service agreements or specific regulatory mandates regarding product discontinuation, potentially resulting in fines or sanctions. Another incorrect approach would be to implement cost-cutting measures that negatively impact the client experience further, such as reducing support staff or essential product features, without a clear understanding of the regulatory implications of such changes on client service standards. This demonstrates a disregard for client welfare and regulatory expectations for service provision. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with a thorough understanding of the problem, including all relevant data and potential impacts. This should be followed by an assessment of all applicable regulations and ethical consideration, brainstorming and evaluating potential solutions, prioritizing those that are compliant and client-focused, is crucial. Finally, implementing the chosen solution with clear communication and ongoing monitoring ensures accountability and adherence to professional standards. Question 4. System analysis indicates that Sankyu is exploring new strategies to enhance client engagement and personalize its service offerings. To achieve this, the firm is considering leveraging its extensive client database. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the regulatory framework governing data privacy and ethical client data handling for Sankyu? Option A. Sharing anonymized client demographic data with external market research firms to identify broader industry trends, assuming that anonymization is sufficient to negate the need for client notification or consent. Option B. Developing a robust data governance policy that mandates obtaining explicit, informed consent from clients for each specific purpose of data usage, including personalization of services and targeted marketing, and ensuring data minimization principles are strictly followed. Option C. Implementing a system that automatically categorizes clients based on their transaction history, and then uses these categories to tailor marketing communications, without seeking explicit consent for this specific data segmentation and communication strategy. Option D. Utilizing client contact information for general company updates and newsletters, assuming that clients implicitly agree to receive such communications by becoming a Sankyu client. Correct answer is C. Implementing a system that automatically categorizes clients based on their transaction history and then uses these categories to tailor marketing communications, without seeking explicit consent for this specific data segmentation and communication strategy. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Sankyu, as a financial services firm, must navigate the complex and evolving regulatory landscape governing client data privacy and security. The core difficulty lies in balancing the need to leverage client data for business development and service improvement with the absolute imperative to comply with stringent data protection laws. A misstep can lead to severe reputational damage, significant financial penalties, and loss of client trust. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any data utilization strategy is not only effective, but also fully compliant and ethically sound. The correct approach involves a proactive and comprehensive data governance framework that prioritizes client consent and data minimization. This means Sankyu should implement robust internal policies and procedures that align with the specified regulatory framework, ensuring that client data is only accessed, processed, and shared with explicit consent for clearly defined purposes. This approach is ethically sound as it respects client autonomy and legally compliant as it adheres to the principles of data protection, such as purpose limitation and data minimization, which are fundamental to maintaining trust and avoiding regulatory breaches. An incorrect approach that involves using client data for marketing without explicit opt-in consent fails to uphold the principle of informed consent, a cornerstone of data protection regulations. This action directly violates the client's right to control their personal information and exposes Sankyu to regulatory sanctions for unauthorized data processing. Another incorrect approach, such as sharing aggregated, anonymized data with third-party analytics firms without a clear contractual agreement and assurance of continued compliance, risks data leakage or re-identification, even if the data is initially anonymized. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to adequately protect client data throughout its lifecycle. A third incorrect approach, relying solely on general data protection clauses in lengthy client agreements without specific, granular consent for each data usage scenario, is insufficient. Modern regulations often require more specific and easily understandable consent mechanisms, and a blanket clause may not be legally defensible if challenged. Professionals at Sankyu should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the applicable regulatory requirements. This involves consulting legal and compliance teams to interpret the nuances of data protection laws. Subsequently, they should conduct a risk assessment for any proposed data utilization activity, considering potential privacy implications and regulatory noncompliance. The decision-making process should prioritize client interests and data privacy, seeking explicit and informed consent for all data processing activities. If there is any ambiguity regarding compliance, the default position should be to err on the side of caution and seek further clarification or to forego the activity. Question 5. Market research demonstrates that Sankyu's internal client onboarding process has become increasingly time-consuming. To address this, Sankyu's operations team proposes several optimization strategies. Which of the following strategies best balances efficiency gains with the absolute priority of adhering to the regulatory framework, laws, and guidelines specified for the Sankyu hiring assessment test? Option A. Outsourcing a portion of the client data verification to a third-party vendor without first conducting a comprehensive due diligence on their data security and compliance protocols. Option B. Introducing a simplified client information form that omits certain data fields deemed less critical for initial onboarding to speed up client completion. Option C. Conducting a thorough review of the current onboarding workflow to identify and eliminate redundant steps, while ensuring all data handling and reporting mechanisms remain compliant with the Sankyu hiring assessment test's specified regulations. Option D. Implementing a new, fully automated client data entry system that bypasses manual verification steps to significantly reduce processing time. The correct answer is D. Implementing a new, fully automated client data entry system that bypasses manual verification steps to significantly reduce processing time. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because Sankyu, as a financial services firm, operates within a highly regulated environment where process optimization must not compromise client interests or regulatory compliance. The pressure to improve efficiency must be balanced against the absolute priority of adhering to the Sankyu hiring assessment test's specified regulatory framework, laws, and guidelines. This requires a nuanced understanding of how operational changes impact client data handling, reporting accuracy, and overall market integrity. The correct approach involves a systematic review and enhancement of existing processes, prioritizing client data security and regulatory adherence throughout. This aligns with the core principles of responsible financial operations, ensuring that any optimization efforts do not inadvertently create vulnerabilities or lead to non-compliance with the Sankyu hiring assessment test's stipulated regulations. Specifically, this approach would involve mapping current workflows, identifying bottlenecks, and proposing changes that are vetted against the specific regulatory requirements of the Sankyu hiring assessment test, ensuring that client confidentiality, data integrity, and reporting accuracy are maintained or improved. This proactive and compliant method is ethically sound and legally defensible. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without a thorough regulatory impact assessment would be professionally unacceptable. This could lead to shortcuts in data handling that violate client privacy regulations or compromise the accuracy of financial reporting, both of which are critical failures under any robust regulatory framework. Another incorrect approach, which involves implementing new technologies without adequate testing or validation against the Sankyu hiring assessment test specific guidelines, risks introducing systemic errors or security breaches. This disregard for due diligence and regulatory alignment is a significant ethical and professional lapse. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the applicable regulatory landscape, as defined by the Sankyu hiring assessment test. This framework should then involve a comprehensive risk assessment of any proposed process changes, with a specific focus on how these changes interact with client data, reporting obligations, and overall compliance. Continuous monitoring and auditing of optimized processes are essential to ensure ongoing adherence to both internal policies and external regulations. Question 6. Benchmark analysis indicate that Sankyu's current candidate onboarding process is experiencing significant delays, impacting recruitment timelines. To address this, Sankyu is exploring various process optimization strategies. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the absolute priority of adhering to the regulatory framework, laws, and guidelines specified for the Sankyu hiring assessment test, while also improving efficiency? Option A. Streamlining the approval process for onboarding documentation by reducing the number of review stages and relying more heavily on individual discretion to expedite candidate processing, even if this deviates from established documented procedures. Option B. Implementing a phased approach to process optimization, starting with a comprehensive review of current workflows to identify specific areas of inefficiency, followed by the design and testing of new procedures that are explicitly validated against the Sankyu hiring assessment test regulatory requirements before full deployment. Option C. Introducing new, unvetted software solutions that promise to automate large portions of the onboarding process, with the expectation that these will significantly reduce processing times, without a prior detailed assessment of their compliance with the Sankyu hiring assessment test's jurisdiction. Option D. Outsourcing a significant portion of the candidate data handling to a third-party vendor based primarily on cost savings, without conducting a thorough due diligence process to ensure the vendor's data security and compliance practices meet the stringent requirements of the Sankyu hiring assessment test's jurisdiction. The correct answer is B. Implementing a phased approach to process optimization, starting with a comprehensive review of current workflows to identify specific areas of inefficiency, followed by the design and testing of new procedures that are explicitly validated against the Sankyu hiring assessment test's regulatory requirements before full deployment. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Sankyu, as a financial services firm, operates within a highly regulated environment where process optimization must not compromise client data security, regulatory compliance, or ethical conduct. The pressure to improve efficiency must be balanced against the absolute priority of adhering to the Sankyu hiring assessment test's specified regulatory framework. Careful judgment is required to identify optimization strategies that are both effective and compliant. The correct approach involves a thorough review of existing processes to identify bottlenecks and inefficiencies, followed by the implementation of standardized, documented procedures that align with the Sankyu hiring assessment test's regulatory requirements. This ensures that any changes enhance efficiency without introducing new risks or violating established guidelines. Specifically, this approach prioritizes understanding the current state, identifying areas for improvement, and then designing solutions that are demonstrably compliant with the exam's jurisdiction. This aligns with the ethical obligation to maintain integrity and uphold regulatory standards in all business operations, as implicitly required by any professional assessment. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on speed and cost reduction without considering regulatory implications would be professionally unacceptable. For instance, automating data handling without ensuring robust data protection measures, as mandated by the exam's jurisdiction, would create significant compliance risks and potential breaches of client confidentiality. Another incorrect approach might involve bypassing established approval workflows for process changes, which undermines internal controls and could lead to the adoption of non-compliant practices. These failures stem from a disregard for the fundamental principles of regulatory adherence and risk management, which are paramount in the financial services sector and within the context of a hiring assessment designed to evaluate such understanding. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the applicable regulatory landscape. When considering process optimization, the first step is to assess the potential impact on compliance and risk. Any proposed changes must be evaluated against the specific rules and guidelines of the Sankyu hiring assessment test jurisdiction. If a proposed optimization creates any doubt regarding compliance, it should be rejected or modified until it can be proven to be fully compliant. This iterative process of assessment, design, and validation ensures that efficiency gains are achieved responsibly and ethically. Question 7. Investigation of potential process inefficiencies within Sankyu's client onboarding procedures. The internal audit team is considering various methodologies. Which approach would best ensure a thorough and compliant review, adhering to the principles of effective process optimization within a regulated environment? Option A. Focus on identifying areas where technology can be implemented to automate tasks, assuming that automation will inherently resolve all process inefficiencies. Option B. Conduct a series of interviews with frontline staff to gather anecdotal feedback on perceived delays and frustrations, and then propose immediate changes based on common themes. Option C. Review industry best practices for client onboarding and recommend Sankyu adopt these without a detailed analysis of its current internal processes. Option D. Map the entire client onboarding process, collect quantitative data on key performance indicators at each stage, and analyze this data to identify bottlenecks and deviations from established procedures before formulating recommendations. The correct answer is B. Conduct a series of interviews with frontline staff to gather anecdotal feedback on perceived delays and frustrations, and then propose immediate changes based on common themes. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Sankyu's internal audit team is tasked with identifying process inefficiencies that could impact regulatory compliance and operational effectiveness. The pressure to deliver findings quickly, coupled with the need to maintain data integrity and avoid premature conclusions, requires a balanced and methodical approach. Misinterpreting or misapplying process optimization techniques can lead to inaccurate assessments, wasted resources, and potentially overlooked compliance risks. The correct approach involves a systematic review of Sankyu's existing processes, focusing on identifying bottlenecks, redundancies, and areas where controls might be weak or non-existent. This method aligns with the principles of good governance and risk management, which are implicitly supported by regulatory frameworks that expect firms to operate efficiently and compliantly. By gathering objective data and engaging with relevant stakeholders, the audit team can ensure their findings are well-founded and actionable, thereby enhancing Sankyu's operational integrity and adherence to any applicable regulatory standards without overstepping their mandate. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on anecdotal evidence or personal opinions risks producing findings that are subjective and lack empirical support. This could lead to misdirected efforts and potentially unfounded accusations, which is professionally unsound and could undermine the credibility of the audit function. Another incorrect approach that prematurely suggests specific technological solutions without a thorough understanding of the underlying process issues is also problematic. This bypasses the critical diagnostic phase, potentially leading to expensive and ineffective implementations that do not address the root causes of inefficiency or compliance gaps. Furthermore, an approach that prioritizes speed over accuracy, leading to the omission of key data points or stakeholder consultations, fails to meet the professional standards of due diligence and thoroughness expected in any audit or process review. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with clearly defining the scope and objectives of the investigation. This involves understanding the specific regulatory expectations relevant to Sankyu's operations. Next, they should gather comprehensive and objective data, utilizing a variety of methods such as process mapping, data analysis, and interviews. This data should then be analyzed to identify root causes of inefficiencies and potential compliance risks. Finally, findings and recommendations should be validated with stakeholders and presented in a clear, actionable manner, always prioritizing accuracy, objectivity, and adherence to professional and regulatory standards. Question 8. Strategic planning requires Sankyu to optimize its client onboarding process to improve efficiency. Which of the following approaches best ensures adherence to UK regulatory requirements and the SISI Code of Conduct? Option A. Focus solely on reducing the time taken for each onboarding, with the understanding that any minor regulatory deviations can be rectified through retrospective adjustments. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive review of the proposed optimization's impact on client data security, fair treatment of customers, and regulatory reporting obligations, aligning with FCA regulations and SISI ethical principles before implementation. Option C. Prioritize the implementation of the most technologically advanced solutions to streamline client data capture, assuming regulatory compliance will be addressed post-launch. Option D. Delegate the responsibility for regulatory oversight of the optimization to the IT department, assuming their technical expertise will inherently ensure compliance. The correct answer is C. Prioritize the implementation of the most technologically advanced solutions to streamline client data capture, assuming regulatory compliance will be addressed post-launch. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Sankyu's compliance team as they navigate the implementation of a new process optimization initiative. The core difficulty lies in balancing the drive for efficiency and cost reduction with the absolute necessity of adhering to the stringent regulatory framework governing financial services in the UK, as overseen by the Financial Conduct Authority, FCA, and detailed in the Chartered Institute for Securities and Investment, SISI, Code of Conduct. Any optimization that inadvertently compromises client protection, data integrity, or fair treatment of customers would constitute a significant regulatory breach. The correct approach, focusing on a thorough impact assessment against FCA regulations and SISI ethical principles, is paramount. This involves proactively identifying potential risks to client outcomes, data security, and market integrity before implementation. By prioritizing regulatory compliance and ethical considerations within the optimization process, Sankyu ensures that efficiency gains do not come at the expense of its legal obligations and professional responsibilities. This aligns with the FCA's principles for businesses, particularly Principle 6, Customers' Interests, and Principle 7, Communications with Clients, and the SISI commitment to upholding public trust and acting with integrity. Implementing an optimization strategy without a comprehensive review of its regulatory implications is professionally unacceptable. This failure to conduct a pre-implementation impact assessment against FCA rules and SISI guidelines could lead to breaches of client confidentiality, violating FCA SISC rules, misrepresentation of services, breaching FCA conc rules, or a general disregard for customer best interests, all of which carry severe regulatory penalties and reputational damage. Similarly, prioritizing speed of implementation over a detailed understanding of how the optimization affects client reporting or complaint handling processes would be a direct contravention of regulatory expectations for transparency and fairness. Professionals at Sankyu should employ a decision-making framework that integrates regulatory due diligence into every stage of process optimization. This involves 1. Initial risk identification, understanding the potential regulatory touchpoints of the proposed optimization. 2. Detailed impact assessment, specifically mapping the optimization's effects against relevant FCA handbook sections and SISI code provisions. 3. Mitigation strategy development, designing controls to address any identified regulatory risks. 4. Stakeholder consultation, engaging with legal, compliance, and operational teams to ensure a holistic understanding. 5. Post-implementation monitoring, continuously reviewing the optimized process for ongoing compliance. Question 9. Benchmark analysis indicates that Sankyu's client reporting process has become increasingly time-consuming. To address this, a proposal has been made to automate certain data aggregation steps and to reduce the number of internal review stages before reports are dispatched to clients. Considering the strict regulatory framework governing financial services firms and the Sankyu hiring assessment test's emphasis on compliance, which of the following approaches best balances efficiency with regulatory adherence? Option A. Prioritize the automation of data aggregation, as this is a purely technical task, and address any compliance concerns that arise after the system is operational. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive review of the current client reporting process, identifying specific regulatory requirements at each stage, and then design and test automated solutions and revised review protocols to ensure full compliance before implementation. Option C. Implement the proposed automation and reduction in review stages immediately to achieve significant time savings and cost efficiencies. Option D. Reduce the number of internal review stages by decentralizing approval authority to individual team members, assuming they are familiar with general compliance principles. Correct answer is C. Implement the proposed automation and reduction in review stages immediately to achieve significant time savings and cost efficiencies. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Sankyu, as a financial services firm, operates within a highly regulated environment where process optimization must align with stringent compliance requirements. The challenge lies in balancing the pursuit of efficiency gains with the absolute necessity of adhering to all applicable regulations, particularly those concerning client data handling and reporting accuracy. Failure to do so can result in significant penalties, reputational damage, and loss of client trust. The correct approach involves a thorough review of existing processes to identify inefficiencies and potential improvements, while simultaneously ensuring that any proposed changes are rigorously assessed against the Sankyu hiring assessment tests regulatory framework. This includes verifying that new processes maintain or enhance data integrity, client confidentiality, and regulatory reporting accuracy. The justification for this approach is rooted in the principle of compliance by design, where regulatory adherence is integrated into the process from its inception, rather than being an afterthought. This aligns with the overarching goal of financial regulation to protect investors and maintain market integrity. An incorrect approach would be to implement process changes solely based on perceived efficiency gains, without a comprehensive regulatory impact assessment. For instance, automating client onboarding without ensuring the automated system fully captures all legally required information or maintains audit trails would be a significant regulatory failure. Another incorrect approach would be to streamline internal communication channels in a way that bypasses necessary compliance checks or approvals, potentially leading to unauthorized actions or misrepresentations. These approaches fail because they prioritize speed or cost reduction over regulatory obligations, which are non-negotiable in the financial services industry. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the regulatory landscape relevant to Sankyu. When considering process optimization, the first step should always be to identify all applicable regulations and guidelines. Subsequently, potential process changes should be evaluated through a compliance lens, asking, does this change maintain or improve our ability to meet regulatory obligations? If there is any doubt, further investigation, consultation with compliance officers, or seeking expert advice is paramount before implementation. This proactive, compliance-first mindset is crucial for navigating the complexities of process improvement in a regulated industry. Question 10. When evaluating potential process optimization initiatives at Sankyu to enhance operational efficiency, which of the following approaches best aligns with the regulatory framework and ethical guidelines governing financial services firms? Option A. Conducting a comprehensive review of current workflows, identifying areas for improvement, and proposing changes that are rigorously assessed for compliance with data protection, client confidentiality, and reporting regulations before implementation. Option B. Prioritizing the adoption of new technologies that promise significant efficiency gains, with a plan to address regulatory compliance issues retrospectively after the technology is fully integrated. Option C. Expediting the implementation of process improvements by bypassing standard internal compliance review protocols to meet aggressive project timelines. Option D. Implementing changes that significantly reduce operational costs and speed up transaction processing, even if it requires streamlining data handling procedures that might reduce the granularity of audit trails. The correct answer is D. Implementing changes that significantly reduce operational costs and speed up transaction processing, even if it requires streamlining data handling procedures that might reduce the granularity of audit trails. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Sankyu, as a financial services firm, operates under strict regulatory oversight. Process optimization, while beneficial for efficiency, must be implemented without compromising client confidentiality, data integrity, or adherence to reporting requirements mandated by the relevant financial regulatory bodies. The challenge lies in balancing operational improvements with the non-negotiable legal and ethical obligations Sankyu has towards its clients and the market. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any optimization efforts do not inadvertently create vulnerabilities or lead to non-compliance. The correct approach involves a systematic review of existing processes, identifying bottlenecks and inefficiencies, and then proposing changes that are vetted for regulatory compliance and ethical implications before implementation. This approach prioritizes risk mitigation and ensures that Sankyu's operations remain within the bounds of the law and its ethical commitments. Specifically, any proposed optimization must be assessed against the principles of data protection, client asset safeguarding, and accurate financial reporting, as stipulated by the Sankyu hiring assessment tests governing regulatory framework. This ensures that efficiency gains do not come at the cost of regulatory breaches or ethical lapses. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without considering regulatory impact would be professionally unacceptable. Such an approach risks violating data privacy laws, potentially leading to unauthorized disclosure of client information, which is a severe ethical and legal breach. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes speed of implementation over thorough testing and validation could introduce errors into financial reporting or operational procedures. This would undermine the integrity of Sankyu's services and could lead to regulatory sanctions for inaccurate record-keeping or reporting. A third incorrect approach that bypasses internal compliance checks to expedite a process optimization project would demonstrate a disregard for established governance structures and regulatory requirements, creating significant legal and reputational risks for Sankyu. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the regulatory landscape governing Sankyu's operations. This involves identifying all applicable laws, regulations, and internal policies. When considering process optimization, the framework should mandate a risk assessment phase where potential impacts on compliance, data security, and client service are thoroughly evaluated. Proposed changes should then be reviewed by legal and compliance departments to ensure adherence to all regulatory mandates. Implementation should only proceed after all necessary approvals and safeguards are in place, with ongoing monitoring to ensure continued compliance and effectiveness. Question 11. Benchmark analysis indicates that Sankyu's client onboarding process is experiencing delays. The internal audit team is considering implementing a new digital verification system to streamline identity checks. Which of the following approaches best aligns with Sankyu's commitment to regulatory compliance and client service excellence under the UK regulatory framework and CISI guidelines? Option A. Outsource the entire onboarding process to a third-party vendor that claims to be faster, without conducting due diligence on their compliance procedures. Option B. Conduct a thorough review of the proposed digital verification system, assessing its impact on client data privacy, accuracy of verification, and adherence to FCA's PRIN and COBS, as well as CISI Code of Conduct, before any implementation. Option C. Implement the new digital verification system immediately to reduce onboarding times, assuming the technology is inherently compliant. Option D. Reduce the number of verification steps in the current process to speed up onboarding, without introducing new technology. The correct answer is C. Implement the new digital verification system immediately to reduce onboarding times, assuming the technology is inherently compliant. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Sankyu's internal audit team is tasked with optimizing processes that directly impact client service delivery and regulatory compliance. The challenge lies in balancing efficiency gains with the imperative to maintain the highest standards of client care and adherence to the specific regulatory framework governing Sankyu's operations, which for this assessment is assumed to be the UK's Financial Conduct Authority, FCA, handbook, and relevant CISI professional conduct rules. A hasty or poorly considered process change could inadvertently lead to breaches of client confidentiality, misrepresentation of services, or failure to meet regulatory reporting deadlines, all of which carry significant reputational and financial risks. The correct approach involves a systematic, client-centric, and compliance-aware review of existing processes, This entails identifying bottlenecks or inefficiencies through data analysis and stakeholder feedback, then proposing changes that demonstrably improve efficiency without compromising client outcomes or regulatory obligations. Specifically, any proposed changes must be evaluated against the FCA's Principles for Businesses, PRIN, and relevant conduct of business rules, COBS, ensuring that client interests are prioritized and that fair treatment of customers is maintained. Furthermore, SISI Code of Conduct, which emphasizes integrity, competence, and due care, guides the ethical implementation of such changes. This approach ensures that Sankyu not only achieves operational improvements, but also upholds its fiduciary duties and professional responsibilities. An incorrect approach would be to implement changes based solely on cost reduction, without a thorough impact assessment on client service or regulatory adherence. For instance, automating client communication without ensuring the accuracy and appropriateness of the automated messages would violate PRIN 6, customers' interests, and COBS 2. 2. Communicating with clients, financial promotions, and product governance. Another incorrect approach would be to bypass internal compliance checks to expedite process implementation. This would contravene PRIN 11, relations with regulators, and SISI requirement for members to act with integrity and to comply with all applicable laws and regulations. A third incorrect approach might involve reducing staff training on new processes, assuming existing knowledge is sufficient. This could lead to errors in client handling or reporting, violating PRIN 2, systems and controls, and SISI commitment to maintaining competence. Professionals should approach process optimization by first understanding the existing regulatory landscape and ethical obligations. This involves a comprehensive risk assessment of current processes and potential changes, engaging relevant stakeholders, including compliance and legal departments, and prioritizing client well-being and regulatory compliance above all else. A phased implementation with pilot testing and continuous monitoring is often advisable to mitigate unforeseen issues. Question 12. Analysis of Sankyu's current candidate onboarding process reveals significant delays in data entry and verification, impacting the overall efficiency of the hiring assessment. Which of the following approaches would best optimize this process while adhering to the principles and guidelines of the Sankyu hiring assessment test? Option A. Focus on increasing the number of administrative staff to manually process data, without re-evaluating the existing data handling procedures for potential inefficiencies or compliance risks. Option B. Implement a new digital platform that automates data entry and verification, with built-in checks to ensure compliance with data privacy and assessment integrity standards. Option C. Develop a system that allows for the immediate sharing of candidate data across all assessment stages without formal verification, prioritizing speed over data accuracy. Option D. Introduce a faster, manual data entry system, where assessors are encouraged to expedite input by skipping certain verification steps to reduce turnaround time. The correct answer is B. Implement a new digital platform that automates data entry and verification, with built-in checks to ensure compliance with data privacy and assessment integrity standards. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Sankyu, as a regulated entity, must balance the pursuit of operational efficiency with its obligations under the relevant regulatory framework. The challenge lies in identifying process improvements that not only enhance productivity, but also uphold compliance and ethical standards. A hasty or poorly considered optimization could inadvertently lead to breaches of regulatory requirements or ethical lapses, impacting Sankyu's reputation and potentially incurring penalties. Careful judgment is required to ensure that efficiency gains do not come at the expense of integrity or legal adherence. The correct approach involves a thorough review of existing processes, identifying bottlenecks and inefficiencies, and then proposing solutions that are demonstrably compliant with the Sankyu hiring assessment test's specific regulatory framework. This approach prioritizes understanding the current state, evaluating potential improvements against regulatory mandates, and implementing changes in a controlled and documented manner. This aligns with the principle of responsible business conduct, ensuring that all operational changes are vetted for compliance before implementation. The regulatory framework for the Sankyu hiring assessment test likely emphasizes fairness, transparency, and data integrity in its hiring processes. Therefore, any process optimization must explicitly consider how it impacts these core principles, ensuring that improvements do not introduce bias, compromise candidate privacy, or circumvent established assessment protocols. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on speed of candidate processing, without considering the impact on assessment validity or fairness, would be professionally unacceptable. This could lead to a situation where candidates are evaluated superficially, potentially overlooking critical skills or qualifications, thereby failing to meet the assessment's objective of identifying suitable candidates. Such an approach would violate the implicit ethical obligation to conduct a fair and thorough assessment. Another incorrect approach, which involves bypassing established data security protocols to expedite information sharing between assessment stages, would be a direct regulatory failure. This would expose Sankyu to risks associated with data breaches and noncompliance with data protection guidelines, which are typically stringent in hiring assessments. A third incorrect approach, implementing changes without proper documentation or stakeholder consultation, risks creating confusion, inconsistency, and potential noncompliance, as the rationale and impact of the changes would not be clearly understood or auditable. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive understanding of the current processes and the specific regulatory requirements governing them. This should be followed by a systematic identification of potential improvements, with each proposed change being rigorously assessed for its impact on compliance, fairness, and ethical considerations. Pilot testing and phased implementation, coupled with clear documentation and communication, are crucial steps to ensure that process optimization is achieved responsibly and sustainably, in full adherence to the Sankyu hiring assessment tests regulatory framework. Question 13. The audit findings indicate that Sankyu's candidate onboarding process is experiencing significant delays, impacting the efficiency of hiring. To address this, Sankyu is considering streamlining the process by reducing the number of mandatory review stages. Which of the following approaches best balances the need for process optimization with regulatory compliance as per the Sankyu hiring assessment test framework? Option A. Implementing a new digital platform that automates document submission and approval, with a built-in compliance check module that flags any deviations from the Sankyu hiring assessment test regulatory requirements. Option B. Outsourcing the entire onboarding process to a third-party vendor that claims to have a faster, more efficient system, without verifying the vendor's adherence to the Sankyu hiring assessment test-specific regulatory framework. Option C. Adopting a lean methodology to identify and eliminate all non-value-adding steps in the current onboarding process, without consulting the compliance department on the impact of these eliminations. Option D. Immediately removing two non-essential review stages identified by the audit as primary bottlenecks, assuming that the remaining stages are sufficient for compliance. The correct answer is A. Implementing a new digital platform that automates document submission and approval, with a built-in compliance check module that flags any deviations from the Sankyu hiring assessment tests regulatory requirements. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires Sankyu to balance the immediate need for efficiency with its ongoing regulatory obligations and ethical commitments. The pressure to demonstrate process improvements to stakeholders, as highlighted by the audit, can create a temptation to overlook or downplay procedural nuances that are critical for compliance. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any optimization efforts do not inadvertently lead to breaches of regulatory frameworks or compromise the integrity of Sankyu's operations. The correct approach involves a thorough review of existing processes, identifying bottlenecks, and then proposing changes that are not only efficient, but also demonstrably compliant with the relevant regulatory framework. This approach prioritizes understanding the why behind current procedures, ensuring that any modifications maintain or enhance compliance rather than creating new risks. Specifically, Sankyu should engage with its compliance and legal teams to vet any proposed changes, ensuring they align with the Sankyu hiring assessment tests' specified regulatory environment. This proactive engagement is crucial for maintaining a robust compliance culture and avoiding potential penalties or reputational damage. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on speed and cost reduction without adequate regulatory consideration would fail to meet Sankyu's obligations. This could manifest as implementing new workflows that bypass necessary checks and balances, thereby increasing the risk of non-compliance. For instance, If the regulatory framework mandates specific documentation or approval steps for certain hiring processes, an optimization that removes these steps would be a direct violation. Another incorrect approach might involve adopting industry best practices from other sectors or jurisdictions without a rigorous assessment of their applicability and compliance within the Sankyu hiring assessment tests specific regulatory context. This could lead to the adoption of procedures that are either insufficient or outright contradictory to the governing laws and guidelines. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the regulatory landscape. Before proposing any process changes, they must identify all applicable laws, regulations, and internal policies. This should be followed by a risk assessment, evaluating how proposed changes might impact compliance. Collaboration with compliance, legal, and relevant operational departments is essential throughout the process. Finally, any implemented changes should be subject to ongoing monitoring and review to ensure continued adherence to regulatory requirements and to identify any unintended consequences. Question 14. Process analysis reveals that Sankyu's client onboarding procedure is time-consuming and involves several manual data entry steps. To improve efficiency, a proposal is made to automate the data capture from client documents using a new software solution that promises significant time savings. However, the compliance department has not yet fully vetted the software's adherence to data privacy and security protocols mandated by the Sankyu hiring assessment test regulatory framework. Which of the following approaches best balances efficiency gains with regulatory and ethical obligations? Option A. Proceed with the immediate implementation of the new software to realize efficiency gains, assuming the software vendor's claims of compliance are sufficient. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive review of the new software's compliance with all relevant data privacy, security, and record-keeping regulations before proceeding with implementation, and if compliant, integrate it into the onboarding process. Option C. Implement the software for a limited pilot group of clients to gauge efficiency without a full regulatory review to quickly identify any operational benefits. Option D. Focus solely on streamlining the manual steps without introducing new technology to avoid any potential regulatory complications associated with new software. The correct answer is A. Proceed with the immediate implementation of the new software to realize efficiency gains, assuming the software vendor's claims of compliance are sufficient. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Sankyu, as a financial services firm, operates within a highly regulated environment. Process optimization, while beneficial for efficiency, must always be conducted with strict adherence to regulatory frameworks, particularly those concerning client data privacy, record keeping, and fair treatment of customers. The challenge lies in balancing the pursuit of operational improvements with the non-negotiable requirements of compliance and ethical conduct. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any optimization does not inadvertently lead to breaches of regulatory obligations or compromise client trust. The correct approach involves a thorough review of existing processes to identify inefficiencies and potential improvements, followed by the implementation of changes that are demonstrably compliant with all applicable regulations. This includes ensuring that any new or modified processes for handling client information, transaction recording, or reporting meet the standards set by the Sankyu hiring assessment test's specified regulatory framework. For instance, if the framework mandates specific data retention periods or security protocols, any optimization must incorporate these requirements. The ethical justification for this approach is rooted in the fiduciary duty Sankyu owes to its clients and the broader responsibility to maintain market integrity. Regulatory compliance is not merely a legal obligation, but an ethical imperative that underpins the firm's license to operate and its reputation. An incorrect approach that prioritizes speed of implementation over regulatory due diligence would be professionally unacceptable. This could manifest as adopting a new software solution for client onboarding without verifying its compliance with data protection laws, leading to potential breaches of privacy regulations. Another failure would be streamlining reporting processes in a way that compromises the accuracy or completeness of information submitted to regulatory bodies, violating record-keeping and reporting requirements. A third incorrect approach might involve automating client communication without ensuring that the automated messages adhere to disclosure requirements or do not create misleading impressions, thus failing to uphold principles of fair client treatment. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive understanding of the relevant regulatory landscape. Before proposing or implementing any process change, they must assess its potential impact on compliance obligations. This involves consulting with legal and compliance departments, conducting risk assessments, and ensuring that any proposed optimization is tested for its adherence to regulatory standards. The principle of compliance by design should guide all process optimization efforts, ensuring that regulatory requirements are integrated from the outset rather than being an afterthought. Question 15. Research into potential process optimization initiatives at Sankyu has identified several avenues for improving operational efficiency. One proposal suggests implementing a new automated client onboarding system that significantly reduces manual data input, but requires less stringent data verification checks to speed up the process. Another suggestion is to outsource a portion of the client reporting function to an offshore provider with lower operational costs, without a comprehensive review of their data security protocols. A third option is to streamline internal approval workflows for client transactions by reducing the number of review stages, aiming to decrease turnaround times. Which of these approaches, if any, best aligns with Sankyu's commitment to regulatory compliance and ethical conduct? Option A. None of the proposed approaches are inherently compliant and require further assessment. Option B. Implementing a new automated client onboarding system with less stringent data verification checks. Option C. Streamlining internal approval workflows for client transactions by reducing the number of review stages. Option D. Outsourcing a portion of the client reporting function to an offshore provider without a comprehensive review of their data security protocols. The correct answer is C. Streamlining internal approval workflows for client transactions by reducing the number of review stages. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Sankyu, as a financial services firm, operates within a highly regulated environment. Decisions regarding process optimization must not only aim for efficiency and cost-effectiveness, but also strictly adhere to the regulatory framework governing its operations. The challenge lies in balancing business objectives with compliance obligations, ensuring that any proposed changes do not inadvertently lead to breaches of conduct rules, data protection laws, or client asset safeguarding requirements. Careful judgment is required to identify optimization strategies that enhance operations without compromising integrity or regulatory standing. The correct approach involves a thorough review of existing processes against current regulatory requirements and industry best practices. This ensures that any proposed optimization is compliant by design. Specifically, it means identifying areas where automation or streamlining can occur without impacting the accuracy of client reporting, the security of client data, or the firm's ability to meet its regulatory obligations, such as those outlined in the Financial Conduct Authority (FCA) Handbook for firms operating in the UK. This proactive, compliance-first methodology is ethically sound and legally defensible, as it prioritizes client protection and regulatory adherence. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without considering regulatory impact is professionally unacceptable. For instance, implementing a new system that reduces manual data entry but introduces a higher risk of data errors or breaches of client confidentiality would violate data protection regulations, e.g., GDPR, and potentially client asset safeguarding rules. Another incorrect approach might involve outsourcing a critical function to a third party without adequate due diligence on their compliance framework. This could lead to a breach of the firm's responsibility to ensure that outsourced functions are managed compliantly, potentially violating principles of outsourcing set out by the FCA. A third incorrect approach could be to bypass established internal control procedures in the name of speed, thereby increasing the risk of operational errors and non-compliance with internal policies designed to meet external regulatory standards. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the regulatory landscape relevant to Sankyu's operations. This involves identifying all applicable laws, regulations, and industry guidelines. When considering process optimization, the framework should mandate a risk assessment that explicitly evaluates potential regulatory and ethical implications of each proposed change. This assessment should involve relevant compliance and legal teams. The decision should then be based on a clear demonstration that the optimized process maintains or enhances compliance, protects client interests, and upholds the firm's ethical obligations. Question 16. Benchmark analysis indicates that Sankyu's client onboarding process has become increasingly time-consuming. The internal audit team is tasked with recommending process optimizations. Which of the following approaches would best align with Sankyu's commitment to regulatory compliance and client service excellence under the UK regulatory framework and SISI guidelines? Option A. Delegate the entire process optimization task to an external consultancy without establishing clear oversight or ensuring their understanding of Sankyu's specific regulatory obligations and client service standards. Option B. Implement a new, fully automated client onboarding system immediately to drastically reduce processing times, without prior extensive testing or client impact assessment. Option C. Conduct a thorough review of the current onboarding workflow, gathering data on processing times, error rates, and client feedback, to identify specific bottlenecks and propose targeted, phased improvements that are rigorously tested for compliance and client experience before full rollout. Option D. Focus exclusively on reducing the number of required client documents to speed up the process, irrespective of whether these documents are mandated by regulatory requirements or essential for client risk assessment. The correct answer is B. Implement a new, fully automated client onboarding system immediately to drastically reduce processing times, without prior extensive testing or client impact assessment. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Sankyu's internal audit team is tasked with optimizing processes that directly impact client service delivery and regulatory compliance. The challenge lies in balancing efficiency gains with the imperative to maintain the highest standards of client care and adherence to the specific regulatory framework governing Sankyu's operations, which for this assessment is assumed to be the UK's Financial Conduct Authority, FCA, handbook, and relevant SISI professional guidance. A failure to correctly identify and implement process improvements could lead to operational inefficiencies, increased risk of errors, and potential breaches of regulatory requirements, impacting client trust and Sankyu's reputation. The correct approach involves a comprehensive review of existing processes, identifying bottlenecks and areas for improvement through data analysis and stakeholder consultation, and then proposing changes that demonstrably enhance efficiency without compromising client outcomes or regulatory adherence. This aligns with the FCA's principles of business, particularly Principle 3, Management and Control, and Principle 6, Customers' Interests, which require firms to have robust systems and controls in place and to act in the best interests of their customers. SISI professional guidance further emphasizes the importance of ethical conduct and maintaining client confidence through diligent and effective service delivery. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without considering the impact on client service quality would be professionally unacceptable. This could lead to a breach of the FCA's Principle 6, as cost-cutting measures might inadvertently harm customers' interests by reducing service levels or increasing the risk of errors. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes speed of implementation over thorough risk assessment and regulatory impact analysis would also be flawed. This could violate FCA Principle 3 by failing to establish adequate controls and risk management frameworks, potentially exposing Sankyu and its clients to undue risks. Furthermore, an approach that bypasses consultation with relevant departments, such as compliance or client relations, would undermine the collaborative and informed decision-making necessary for effective and compliant process optimization, potentially leading to unintended consequences and regulatory breaches. Professionals should approach process optimization by first understanding the current state, identifying key performance indicators, KPI, and regulatory obligations, then systematically evaluating potential improvements through a lens of both efficiency and compliance. This involves a structured methodology, stakeholder engagement, and a clear understanding of the potential impact on clients and regulatory adherence. Question 17. Comparative studies suggest that process optimization can significantly enhance operational efficiency within financial institutions. For Sankyu, a firm committed to both innovation and regulatory adherence, which of the following approaches to optimizing its client reporting process would be most professionally sound and compliant? Option A. Outsourcing the entire client reporting function to a third-party vendor without conducting a thorough due diligence assessment of the vendor's security protocols and regulatory compliance history. Option B, expediting the client onboarding process by reducing the number of required verification steps, thereby speeding up account opening times. Option C, implementing a new automated reporting system that reduces manual data entry, with a concurrent review and update of data encryption and access control policies to ensure client information remains secure and confidential. Option D, introducing a new, more complex reporting dashboard for clients, without providing comprehensive training to the client-facing teams on its interpretation or the underlying data. Correct answer is C, implementing a new automated reporting system that reduces manual data entry, with a concurrent review and update of data encryption and access control policies to ensure client information remains secure and confidential. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because Sankyu, as a financial services firm, operates within a highly regulated environment where process optimization must align with strict compliance requirements. The pressure to improve efficiency can inadvertently lead to shortcuts that compromise client data security or regulatory adherence. Careful judgment is required to balance the pursuit of operational excellence with the non-negotiable duty to protect client interests and uphold regulatory standards. The correct approach involves a systematic review of Sankyu's internal processes, focusing on identifying bottlenecks and inefficiencies through data analysis and employee feedback, while ensuring that any proposed changes are thoroughly vetted against relevant regulatory frameworks, such as those governing data privacy, anti-money laundering, and client suitability. This approach is best professional practice because it prioritizes a holistic view of process improvement, integrating compliance and risk management from the outset. Regulatory justification stems from the principle of treating customers fairly and the obligation to maintain robust internal controls, as mandated by financial regulators. Ethical justification lies in the fiduciary duty to act in the best interests of clients and to operate with integrity. An approach that focuses solely on cost reduction by automating client onboarding, without a corresponding review of data security protocols, would be professionally unacceptable. This failure would violate data protection regulations, such as those requiring secure handling of personal information, and could lead to breaches, fines, and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach, implementing new trading platforms without adequate testing or staff training, risks operational errors that could lead to financial losses for clients in Sankyu and potentially violate market conduct rules requiring diligence and competence. Finally, an approach that bypasses internal compliance checks to expedite a process, even if seemingly efficient, would be a direct contravention of regulatory requirements for oversight and control, exposing Sankyu to significant legal and financial repercussions. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the overarching business objective, e.g., process optimization. This should be immediately followed by a comprehensive risk assessment, identifying potential regulatory, operational, and ethical pitfalls. Solutions should then be developed collaboratively, involving relevant stakeholders including compliance and legal departments, and rigorously tested against both efficiency goals and regulatory mandates before implementation. Continuous monitoring and post-implementation review are crucial to ensure ongoing compliance and effectiveness. Question 18. Risk assessment procedures indicate that Sankyu's client onboarding process has become inefficient, leading to delays in service delivery. The internal audit team is proposing a review to optimize this process. Which of the following approaches best balances efficiency gains with regulatory compliance and client service quality? Option A. Implement automated data entry for all client information, bypassing manual verification steps to speed up the process. Option B. Introduce a new, complex digital platform for onboarding without extensive user training or pilot testing, assuming clients will adapt quickly. Option C. Reduce the number of mandatory client verification checks to expedite the onboarding timeline. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive review of the current onboarding workflow, gathering feedback from client-facing staff and compliance officers, and then pilot proposed changes with a small client group before full rollout. The correct answer is A. Implement automated data entry for all client information, bypassing manual verification steps to speed up the process. Explanation: This scenario presents a professional challenge because Sankyu's internal audit team is tasked with optimizing processes that directly impact client service delivery and regulatory compliance. The challenge lies in balancing the need for efficiency gains with the imperative to maintain the highest standards of client care and adherence to the regulatory framework governing financial services. A hasty or poorly considered optimization could inadvertently lead to breaches of client confidentiality, misrepresentation of services, or failure to meet reporting obligations, all of which carry significant regulatory penalties and reputational damage. Careful judgment is required to ensure that process improvements do not compromise the integrity of Sankyu's operation or its clients' interests. The correct approach involves a systematic, client-centric review of existing processes, focusing on identifying bottlenecks and redundancies that do not negatively affect service quality or regulatory adherence. This method prioritizes understanding the current state, gathering feedback from frontline staff who interact directly with clients and manage regulatory tasks, and then proposing changes that are tested for their impact on both efficiency and compliance. Regulatory justification stems from the principle of treating customers fairly and the obligation to maintain robust internal controls, as mandated by the relevant regulatory bodies. By involving stakeholders and conducting pilot tests, Sankyu demonstrates a commitment to responsible innovation and proactive risk management, aligning with the spirit and letter of regulatory expectations for operational resilience and client protection. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without considering the impact on client service or regulatory compliance is professionally unacceptable. This failure violates the ethical duty to act in the best interests of clients and the regulatory requirement to maintain adequate systems and controls. Another incorrect approach, which involves implementing changes based on assumptions without validating their effectiveness or potential unintended consequences, demonstrates a lack of due diligence. This can lead to operational disruptions, client dissatisfaction, and potential breaches of regulatory obligation, such as data protection or accurate record keeping. A third incorrect approach, which bypasses necessary stakeholder consultation, particularly with compliance and legal departments, risks overlooking critical regulatory requirements or ethical considerations, leading to non-compliance and potential enforcement actions. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the current process and its regulatory implications. This should be followed by a risk-based assessment of potential optimization strategies, considering both efficiency gains and potential negative impacts on clients and compliance. Stakeholder engagement, including consultation with compliance, legal, and operational teams, is crucial. Pilot testing and phased implementation, with clear metrics for success and ongoing monitoring, are essential to ensure that process optimization achieves its goals without compromising regulatory adherence or client welfare. Question 19. Regulatory review indicates that Sankyu is exploring new methods to streamline its hiring assessment process to improve efficiency. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the absolute priority of adhering to the Sankyu hiring assessment test's regulatory framework? Option A. Implementing a new automated scoring system for assessment responses that significantly reduces grading time, without prior validation against the Sankyu hiring assessment test's specific compliance criteria. Option B. Developing and piloting a revised assessment module that has undergone a thorough review by Sankyu's legal and compliance teams to ensure full alignment with the Sankyu hiring assessment test's regulatory framework before wider deployment. Option C. Prioritizing the reduction of assessment completion time for candidates, even if it means marginally deviating from certain procedural guidelines outlined in the Sankyu hiring assessment test. Option D. Adopting a widely recognized industry standard for assessment efficiency, assuming it will meet Sankyu's regulatory obligations under the Sankyu hiring assessment test. The correct answer is A. Implementing a new automated scoring system for assessment responses that significantly reduces grading time, without prior validation against the Sankyu hiring assessment test's specific compliance criteria. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Sankyu, as a regulated entity, must balance the pursuit of operational efficiency with strict adherence to regulatory requirements. The pressure to optimize processes can sometimes lead to shortcuts or overlooking critical compliance steps, which could result in significant penalties, reputational damage, and loss of client trust. Careful judgment is required to ensure that efficiency gains do not compromise the integrity of Sankyu's operations or its legal obligations. The correct approach involves proactively identifying and implementing process improvements that are demonstrably compliant with all relevant regulations. This means that any proposed optimization must be thoroughly vetted against the Sankyu hiring assessment test framework. The justification for this approach lies in the absolute priority of regulatory compliance. Failing to do so would violate the core tenets of responsible business conduct and could lead to sanctions. Ethical considerations also demand that Sankyu operates within the bounds of the law and maintains a high standard of integrity in its hiring processes. An incorrect approach would be to implement changes based solely on perceived efficiency gains without a rigorous regulatory review. This could manifest as adopting new assessment methodologies or data handling procedures that, while faster, have not been validated against the Sankyu hiring assessment test's specific requirements. Such an approach fails to acknowledge the absolute priority of the regulatory framework and risks noncompliance. Another incorrect approach would be to assume that general industry best practices for process optimization automatically satisfy the specific requirements of the Sankyu hiring assessment test. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for the unique regulatory landscape governing Sankyu's operations. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance above all else. This involves a multi-stage process. First, understanding the specific regulatory framework thoroughly. Second, identifying potential process improvements. Third, conducting a detailed assessment of each proposed improvement against the regulatory requirements. And fourth, implementing only those improvements that have been unequivocally validated for compliance. This systematic approach ensures that efficiency is pursued responsibly and ethically, safeguarding Sankyu from regulatory breaches. Question 20. Consider a scenario where Sankyu is looking to streamline its hiring assessment process to reduce turnaround time for candidates. The internal operations team proposes a new automated system that significantly speeds up data entry and initial scoring. However, this new system reduces the number of manual checks currently in place to verify the accuracy of candidate responses and assessment outcomes. What is the most appropriate approach for Sankyu to consider regarding this proposed process optimization? Option A. Implement the new automated system but postpone any review of its impact on data accuracy until after it has been in use for a full hiring cycle. Option B. Implement the new automated system after conducting a thorough review to ensure it maintains the integrity and accuracy of assessment data, and complies with all relevant Sankyu hiring assessment test guidelines. Option C. Immediately implement the new automated system to gain a competitive advantage in attracting talent by offering faster feedback. Option D. Implement the new automated system and instruct the operations team to focus on further speed enhancements, assuming that automation inherently guarantees accuracy. The correct answer is B. Implement the new automated system after conducting a thorough review to ensure it maintains the integrity and accuracy of assessment data and complies with all relevant Sankyu hiring assessment test guidelines. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Sankyu, as a financial services firm, must balance the imperative to improve operational efficiency with its stringent regulatory obligations. The challenge lies in identifying and implementing process improvements that do not inadvertently compromise compliance with the Sankyu hiring assessment test's specific regulatory framework, which emphasizes adherence to established procedures and data integrity. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any optimization efforts are both effective and compliant. The correct approach involves a systematic review of existing processes, identifying bottlenecks or inefficiencies, and proposing changes that are thoroughly vetted for their impact on regulatory adherence and data accuracy. This approach is right because it prioritizes compliance and risk mitigation, which are foundational to operating within the Sankyu hiring assessment test's regulatory environment. Specifically, it aligns with the principles of maintaining robust internal controls and ensuring the integrity of hiring assessment data, as implicitly required by any assessment framework designed to evaluate candidates fairly and effectively. This proactive and compliant method ensures that process improvements enhance, rather than undermine, the reliability and fairness of the assessment. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on speed without considering the impact on data validation would fail to meet regulatory expectations. Such an approach risks introducing errors or inconsistencies into the assessment data, which could lead to inaccurate candidate evaluations and potential breaches of assessment integrity guidelines. Another incorrect approach that bypasses established approval workflows for process changes would violate internal governance and potentially circumvent necessary risk assessments, thereby exposing Sankyu to compliance failures and operational risks. A third incorrect approach that prioritizes cost reduction over the thoroughness of assessment procedures would similarly undermine the quality and fairness of the hiring assessment, potentially leading to discriminatory outcomes or the selection of unsuitable candidates, which is contrary to the spirit and likely the letter of any professional assessment framework. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the regulatory requirements and ethical standards governing their operations. When considering process optimization, the initial step should be to identify the specific objectives of the optimization, and then to map these objectives against the existing regulatory landscape. Any proposed changes must undergo a rigorous impact assessment, evaluating potential effects on compliance, data integrity, risk, and fairness. Seeking input from compliance and legal departments, as well as relevant stakeholders, is crucial before implementation. Continuous monitoring and review post-implementation are also essential to ensure ongoing adherence and effectiveness.